Hey middle school students, I hope you're having a great night. Leaders, thanks again for being here. And I just want to give a couple quick announcements, really one, before we get into the message. And that is, I want to invite you guys, I don't know if anybody here, if you like laser tag or bowling or games or pizza, not sure if you like any of those things. You probably don't, maybe you've never done any of those before. But if you have done some of those things and you like those things, I want to invite you to come to our next youth event, which is Sunday evening, April 24th. We're going to go to Brunswick Zone in Blaine. It's $20 a person. That includes your dinner. And we'll meet at the office and we'll go over there to the Brunswick Zone in Blaine. And we're going to have a blast together. Again, we do these events, fun events like this, one, so that you can get connected with other people in the youth ministry, build friendships, build relationships. But secondly, we do it so that it's an easy invite for you to bring a friend, a new friend, a non-Christian, whatever it takes to get somebody new to come to a church event, and then hopefully invite them from there to the regular youth ministry. Sunday night, 24th. Mark your calendars, take a flyer, show it to your parents, $20. See you then. All right, I'm back. And I'm outside at one of my favorite spots. I think I showed you guys this video of this place a couple of weeks ago, but I'm out at that park in Ramsey outside because I wanted to shoot the message outside because I thought it felt more like the nature of Jonah. Actually, it's just because I didn't want to do it in the office. But thank you to Jake for starting off the series on Jonah last week when I wasn't here. And thank you guys for being patient while Crystal and I were gone. And we needed to go see the ocean so that we could understand better the book of Jonah. So we took a little trip out to Virginia, and then I went to school in Louisville. And anyway, we're back. So it's good to be back, and I hope you guys are having a great night so far. Last week we started the book of Jonah. It's going to take us 5 weeks. And my prayer is that this book is extremely helpful for you, that it convicts you, that it makes you change, and that you would read it even beyond Wednesday nights. So I sat down this morning and I read the whole book of Jonah, and it took me maybe 20 minutes. It's 4 chapters long. It's simple, and I want to encourage you to read it on your own time, to read through the whole book of Jonah. Today, Jake introduced us to the book a little bit last week. Today, we're going to go into some details on the first part, and what I named the message title is Busted by God, okay? Busted by God. And that's the name of it, and I think it'll make sense as we get into this a little bit more. Some bikers just gave me a really weird look. Anyway, if you remember the beginning of the book, Jonah is called by God to go to a people in Nineveh, and these are wicked, mean, nasty people, and he does not want to go. I was trying to think of like a modern day equivalent, and most of you have seen the news of things that have happened in the last year or so. Let's call it ISIS, okay? Let's say that Jonah is called to go and share Jesus Christ with ISIS, the leaders of ISIS in the Middle East. People that kill people, they behead people, they torture people, and yet God says, I love these people. You need to go and you need to tell them about Christ. That's crazy to think about going to ISIS, but this is what Jonah was called to do. Can you imagine why he didn't want to do it? So what does Jonah do? Well, he runs from God. So open with me to Jonah, and we're going to walk through all of the first chapter. If you find the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, just go back a little bit, and you can find the book of Jonah. I'm going to get rid of this gum, and I'm going to throw it on the ground, but I promise I'll pick it up afterwards. All right, Jonah chapter 1. Let's read the first few verses together. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it because I've seen how wicked its people are. Okay, that's the first 2 verses. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. Okay, that's the first 3 verses. I assume Jake covered some of that last week. But I just want to point out one thing. Do you realize how blatantly disobedient Jonah was to God? Maybe your parents have told you something, you need to do this, and you do exactly the opposite. This is Jonah. He could not do something more opposite of what God told him to do. And I want to just leave this with you for this point. If you want to sin, if you want to run away from God, if you want to do things your own way, you will always find a ship headed to Tarshish. Now, I'm not saying you're actually going to get on a ship. I'm saying there'll be plenty of open doors if you want to run away from God. It's one click away, one tap away, one swipe away on your phone, what you want to look at. It's one text away, it's one Instagram away, it's one Snapchat away. If you want to run away from God, the possibilities are endless. There'll always be an open door, and there was ironically an open door for Jonah to get on a ship, to go in the opposite direction of God. There will always be an opportunity for you if you want to run away from God. It's always available. So he does. He gets on a ship and he leaves. He goes in the opposite direction. This is God's prophet running from God's command. And this happens in verse 4. But the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help, and they threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him. "How can you sleep at a time like this?" he shouted. "Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he'll pay attention to us and spare our lives." Then the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused the terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. Busted. "Why has this awful storm come down on us?" they demanded. "Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality?" So Jonah gets totally busted. And what you see is God's amazing power to bring things into being, okay? So not only does God allow Jonah to get onto this boat, but then he causes this ginormous storm to happen. He's gonna cause other things to happen in this book too. Causes a whale to eat him. He causes a tree to grow. He causes a worm to come at the end of the book. God is in complete control of all the little details of the story, including the details of the story of your life. And God uses those details to expose Jonah. What I find really interesting about this passage is, do you notice that Jonah is sleeping through a ridiculous storm? Again, it's verse 6. How can you sleep at a time like this? I'll tell you how I think Jonah can sleep. Have you ever sinned, ran away from God, did something that you knew was not good, and that night you said, "I just need to go to bed. I want to go to bed right now. I want to go to sleep." Why do you think you always want to sleep after you did something that you really regret? Why? Because sleeping helps you forget. Sleeping helps to numb the pain. It helps to make the issue disappear. That's why I think most of the time after we do something really dumb, we'd like to go take a nap, or you just want to go to bed for the night. That's why Jonah was maybe sleeping in the bottom of the ship. He felt awful. So he just wanted to ignore it. He wanted to numb the pain. He wanted to say, okay, I did something wrong, but it'll be fine. God will get over it. Not so fast. God wakes Jonah up along with every other sailor on the ship because he's in deep, deep trouble. Do you try to sleep and to numb the pain of your sin? When you do something wrong, do you try to just hopefully God will forget about it? Hopefully he won't punish me. Hopefully I'll wake up the next morning and it'll be better. I got news for you. It doesn't work that way. Okay, go to verse 9. Jonah answered, "I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." So we have an explanation of who God is. This is not just any God. This is the God that made it all, including the very ocean that I'm about to go swimming in. And the sailors were terrified when they heard this, for he had already told them he was running away from the Lord. "Oh, why did you do it?" they groaned. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked, "What should we do to stop this storm? If you know this God that apparently made all this, how do we get him to stop it?" "Throw me into the sea," Jonah said, "and it will become calm. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault." Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to the land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. Think about this. Have you tried to cover up your sin by lying even further? It was just a small lie to begin with, and then you work harder and harder and harder to try to cover up that lie or that sin or that thing that you did wrong. The sailors try to keep pushing against the storm, but they don't make any progress. And then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God, not their God yet anyway. "Oh Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sin. Don't hold us responsible for his death. Oh Lord, you've sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked up Jonah and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. So this is crazy. Think about this. The one thing Jonah did not want to do he accomplished by escaping God. Now think about this. He did not want to go to a pagan, non-Christian people because he did not want God to give them mercy and forgiveness. And yet, he's on a boat full of sailors that don't know God, and because of his disobedience, God still shows these sailors who he really is. Now that's crazy. And eventually he's going to go to Nineveh, and eventually those people are going to repent too. Seems like everybody understands God in this book except the man of God. Sometimes maybe your friends have a better view of God than you do. Because sometimes you think you can escape. Sometimes I think I can just escape what God says, what God thinks. Maybe he'll go to sleep when I go to sleep, and maybe he'll forget about it in the morning. It doesn't work that way. Somebody's going to pay for your sin. It's either going to be you or it's going to be Jesus. But the only way that that sin gets paid for, not by you, is through asking for forgiveness and repenting of your sin to Jesus. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about Jonah's getting busted by God, okay? Now remember, that's kind of what I named this passage. Jonah got busted by God. And here's my prayer. My hope is that you get busted by God. And if God uses your parents to bust you, then that's fine with me. If God uses a teacher or a youth pastor or a youth leader or somebody to bust you, however he does it, fine. But it's better that you get busted than for you to continue in your sin. Trust me. Now, think about what would have happened had Jonah not been caught in a storm and thrown to the whale. He would have gone to Tarshish. He would have lived his life. And he would have gone on just fine over on that side of the ocean. Or at least so we think. But here's one thing I know. He would have lived with regret his whole life, because he disobeyed God. He would have lived with a distance between him and God, because his sin, you cannot hide your sin and just think it's going to be forgiven or forgotten. It doesn't work that way. So Jonah would have gone on his own way. He would have just lived his life, and everything would have been peachy, but not quite, because there would have been a distance between him and God. There would have been a disobedience that never got settled. And there would be people on the other side that never would have known God if Jonah didn't get swallowed by the whale. So think about this in your own life. I'm praying that God busts you even when it's painful. And sometimes, so here's kind of a big word. I'll try to make it simple. Sometimes God uses active wrath, and sometimes God uses passive wrath. Now let me explain that. The active wrath of God is obvious when he sends a gigantic storm to stop or to punish what has been happening. But I think sometimes the passive wrath of God is even scarier. And you know what the passive wrath of God is? We find this in Romans chapter 1. He says, and they wanted to do life their own way. They wanted to have relationships with people their own way. They wanted to live in sin their own way. And so God says, I let them do it. And one day they will suffer ultimate punishment for that sin because it was not forgiven. because God said, fine, do it your way. If you're so convinced that your way is right, then do it, and we'll see how that works out for you. And in the end, sin always leads to death. And death is where we'll eventually be judged by God. And if our sin is not forgiven and taken care of by the cross of Christ, we will pay for that sin. Now, Jonah didn't know anything about the cross, but he did know about a God who eventually would forgive his sins through the cross. But he ran from this God. And in God's mercy, not punishment, in God's mercy, he stuck him in the ocean and swallowed him up with a whale. Have you ever been running from God, and in his mercy toward you, you got caught, you got busted, you got stopped in your tracks? That was not punishment. It may have felt like punishment at the time, but that was actually God's mercy towards you, God's goodness towards you when you got busted. Because it kept you from living a life of sin and lies that you otherwise would have continued in. But God stopped it. And it seemed painful at the time, but looking back, you should see, thank you for stopping this ridiculous mess of lies that I had gotten myself into. Thank you that I got busted. And he goes on, and the chapter finishes with this. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. You know why that's important, right? Who else was in the belly of a tomb for 3 days and 3 nights? Ultimately, this always points us to Jesus Christ. He was in that tomb for 3 days and 3 nights until he rose from the grave. Jonah was in the belly of a whale for 3 days and 3 nights until he was spit out by the whale. Every Old Testament passage points to our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. But I thank God that he doesn't let us just get away with our sin. He doesn't just let us walk away and hope that he forgets about it. And if he does, I'd be very worried if I were you. And I would pursue God if I were you and say, I don't want to live apart from you. Don't give me your passive wrath. I need your help. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'll give you a quick example and then a couple questions. When I was, I think, 15, about 15 is when I came into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I was convicted over my sin. I knew that I had issues. I knew that I was living as a hypocrite. I knew I was not a follower of Christ because I went to church, but I did not know God. And at 15, that changed for me. And for the first time, I experienced forgiveness. I understood who God is, what he had done for me on the cross, that I was forgiven because of his perfection, not because of my good deeds or good works. But about 2 years after that, I had now been really involved in the youth ministry. I had been on a missions trip. I had gotten involved and led worship and done all sorts of really, really good things. But I was living a life, a secret life. And that was my secret life of pornography and lust and whatever goes with that. And I was 17 years old, and I went to this retreat. And I'd been to a few retreats before. And this was a church retreat with Pastor Ray. And there was a speaker there that stood up on Friday night of the retreat. The very first thing he said is, all we're going to do at this retreat is you're going to come up here and say, here's my sin, and I need help, and I need prayer. I'm like, this is the retreat? This is weird. Who is this kooky guy? About 5 minutes later, I've never felt the power of God in my life like I did at that moment. And my heart was beating quickly, and it was absolutely nuts. But God said, go up there in front of 90 or 100 kids, including Crystal, your girlfriend, and her mom, which stank. And I went up in front of all these people, and I said, I got a problem. I lead worship, I go on missions trips, I go to church all the time, but I got a pornography problem, a lust problem, and I cannot fix this. And I was broken before all these people, and I was busted by God. And it hurt. It was awful. But God used that for other people's lives. He used it to change my life. And I praise God today that I got busted when I was 17 years old. Because I don't know how I would have been living today if I wasn't busted then. Are you running from God in any area of your life? Are you pretending like he's just going to close his eyes? What sin are you trying to hide from God? And is that working for you? And if you've been busted or you're about to get busted, can you see that ultimately that is for your good? I hope you enjoy your small groups. I'm praying for you.